Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to apologise that I'm coming to you from my car. I'm having internet issues, so I'm working remotely, literally today. Today we've got a fantastic team that is going to be speaking with you about some of their NCP experiences. And just after the presentation, we'll have Mr. Liam Cosgrave, who is the Director of the National Colombo Plan Secretariat. So he'll be talking about some of the reforms they've got planned for 2024 and answering some of the questions that you might have as well. But first, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which and the waters on which we work, live and play. I offer my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and especially the Yagara, Turrbal, Kabi Kabi and Mandindanji peoples are the lands that I've lived on. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders on the lands that you're joining us from today. First of all, I would like to do a brief presentation of the Torrens team. And I'd like to acknowledge the Torrens team actually coming along and being active members of ACEN Queensland. And they wanted to take the opportunity to share some of their experiences. So I'd like to introduce to you briefly Dominic Ohana, Ashley Hillsley and Anne Digby. And I'll hand over to you, Dominica, if you'd like to introduce the team. And thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. Greetings from Terrible Land. And maybe we can share the presentation now. Thank you. Welcome everyone. As Faith said, today we're going to focus on the student global mobility and the fantastic work that Annie and Ash have done when it comes to work integrated learning and slightly different approach to teaching. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the team today is myself. I am the senior learning facilitator and the subject coordinator of now 4 work integrated learning subjects. And my colleagues Annie and Ashley can introduce themselves. Annie, over to you. You muted, Annie.
Thanks, Dominica. I had a feeling I was going to do that. So thanks everyone for joining us today to talk about my favourite subject, which is the Torrens Nepal WIL program. So in the history of this program is that in 2012, I started a social enterprise in Nepal, and I funded it by taking health students and practitioners on a tour of the healthcare sector over there. It was my unique selling point. And so having seen how impactful that experience was for all the participants, I was really keen to bring the experience to the Torrens students when I came on board as a senior learning facilitator in health sciences in 2019. So I was the lead applicant for a new Colombo Plan grant application in 2019, which was unsuccessful. But with further stakeholder engagement and input from Professor Craig McLaughlin and Ashley Hillsley, our submission in 2020, in the middle of 2020, was successful in securing funding for 12 students and 1 facilitator. But of course, that was in the middle of COVID. And so we had to shelve the plans until all the borders reopened. But the interest from the students was really significant. And once the borders did open, we became aware that there were other NCP grants that had been approved before COVID that were now no longer able to be used. And so we applied to DFAT to change those grants and were able to apply them to our Nepal program. So in the end, as a result of the new Columbo Plan grants, we got $3,000 each, and it allowed 26 students and 2 facilitators to attend. And we left for Kathmandu in early December 2022 for a 15-day study tour. So with our new Colombo Plan grant in hand, we had to set about framing the opportunity within the university context before we could depart for Nepal. And so Ashley will discuss the aim of the program and the actions that we took. Over to you, Ash.
Cheers. And obviously, Anne and I have had to work very closely together throughout this process, and we've worked together since around 2017. And from the get-go, I suppose placements overseas and work integrated learning opportunities have been the flavour of our conversations. And how do we realise this in the context of a educational framework? Obviously, as Anne's mentioned, she began this as a self-driven social enterprise for herself before coming into an educational context. So overlaying that as well, TUA had previously offered some international internships, but not on the scale of the opportunities of what we were looking to achieve here with this particular program. So our aims, therefore, needed to be addressing the requirements of obviously NCP elements, but also lead to the ambitious set of outcomes for our students that we were hoping to be able to achieve as well. As most will be aware, research repeatedly shows the benefits to health students who undertake international student placements, classified under three main areas of cultural, personal, and professional development. Cultural outcomes generally expected include increased cultural awareness, sensitivity, adaptability, intelligence, and cross-cultural communication. So for us, we had to look at how are we going to facilitate that within a subject overlay that can connect the dots between the ongoing educational experience and the program, because we wanted to make this a synergistic experience for students that existed authentically as aligned to their programs that they're studying, as well as within this, optional opting in extracurricular experience. So personal outcomes generally reported include things like academic performance and increased self-efficacy and confidence and self-reflection. And obviously, looking at things broadly that can be experienced out of this, obviously the ability to forge global networks and partnerships, improving their problem solving and analytical skills, their interdisciplinary thinking, their interprofessional communication, and obviously building an interest in having an international career or becoming global citizens as a broad goal for university students generally, and one that is obviously a significant factor for Torrens University. We have one of our strategic thematic goals being around being global for our students, global for our practices. And so, therefore, what we wanted to try and cultivate with these students is sustained development of these students into ongoing professionals who exist in this, the broader world, not just the context of their programs. So I suppose what we went on to do with this program was also focusing on our own aims too, around making sure that there's a strengthening of the existing relationships that we used and you have to have in place to be able to secure these NCP grants to begin with, but also building bridges into new partnerships as well, partnerships with health facilities, other NGOs in Nepal, as well as new partnerships that connect us into future opportunities that maybe extend beyond the faculty and into other areas of opportunities for our students in the future. Next slide, please, Anne. So I suppose when looking for a subject that would best align to the opportunity, we had to examine, I suppose, broadly the whole curriculum in the health faculty to try and find spaces that would make sense for this to exist. And what we wanted to really cultivate was a real world experiential classroom. The notion that we could replicate what we were doing in the subjects, in a real world situation, in a world that in a space that would enrich the students in ways that a traditional delivery model might be challenged by. That challenge is what we took on to try and find a subject. We also wanted to overlay the requirement to benefit a broad range of health disciplines and cultivate those elements we talked about in the aims of interprofessional communication, and even considering strengthening collaboration and ties between discipline groups. So we looked across subjects that were connecting clinical science areas, public health areas, social science areas, and therefore the common core subjects in our portfolios became a bit of a targeted focus. The subject we ended up attaching as the target subject that seemed to just be the perfect alignment was the subject we call it's EPR 307, Entrepreneurship, Professionalism and Business Skills in Health. The program itself wouldn't, I suppose, enable 7 programs running through that, with a future opportunity for another 2 programs to study into this program, have that program available to them, and make it accessible to a large number of students in our cohorts. Again, emphasizing that interprofessional opportunity and context. It also, within that subject, had a real focus on developing professional identity and developing their employability outcomes. So, building business models and considerations like that, or employment-focused portfolios that would enable them to achieve employment on completion of the subject. So it just had that alignment of outcome associated to the programs that just made a lot of sense for us. I suppose broadly speaking, we wanted to look at the learning outcomes and make sure they would be adaptable enough that we could connect in the type of assessment refinements and constructive alignment needed to make sure an assessment strategy could be authentic within the framework of the subject. So the amended program structure that we were able to work on would be able to allow us to build in a modified delivery plan and assessment strategy that maintain that constructive alignment and being delivered in an alternative study period. We run a 3-trimester model at Torrens University, and we have a summer study period, which is called trimester 4. So we were able to identify that if we were to place this into trimester 4, we could run a program that would not impact on the main areas of students' progression in their programs. So again, removing some of the inertia from uptake with students. So getting into a bit more of the nuts and bolts of the program, we could start to work on developing a program within the subject where assessments allowed for group collaboration, surveying questions to students, identifying specific health needs that could be addressed through a social enterprise. And social enterprise alignment is another theme that we were able to write into a health business-based subject that just made a lot of sense for getting over there and giving students real-world opportunities to impact the communities on the ground, but also take away experiences of learning for their own cultural context as well. So the program is grounded in an experiential learning framework. The experience being central to the learning process has the potential to be transformative for these students. We've seen that. I'll go through that maybe towards the end of the presentation in terms of the ongoing research that we're doing in the space. But regardless of the discipline background, we could see that students were able to value the opportunity to have interdisciplinary thinking opportunities, connecting in a range of considerations as they experienced diverse new opportunities. And I suppose that outcome, that was part of the hypothesis for including this particular subject as the opportunity and the vector for this to exist. So going on a little bit from, that explains a little bit about the subject and why, the how, the connection of dots, those things together around subject selection, and I suppose broadly the educational framework we've positioned it in. We then have to go on to student selection process. And the student selection process is again something that is partly driven by NCP requirements. So obviously we have guidelines that we have to put forward regardless. Overlaying the primary considerations of things like students having a credit level GPA, students needing to be able to study the subject and not have implications to their existing study progression, commitments to be able to bring back and influence their local communities post-study. What we decided to do to augment the elements that could be extracted through our systems is ask them to create a 5-minute video presentation as part of the submission process. That would allow them to explain to a selection panel why they would become a great ambassador for Australia at Torrens University, showcasing their skills and their qualities, allowing them to be able to articulate what are their drivers for wanting to be part of this experience, what qualities they bring to the program, how they could, I suppose, bring back elements of what they've learned from over there, strengthening ties, building relationships, and also is there anything they could do that would allow them to commit to participating in a social impact initiative that benefits the communities on the ground in Nepal and possibly extends back to social impact in Australia as well. So our selection panel was then able to take that process and overlay the data on their GPAs and selection criteria and so forth, and come up with our final selection of students from there. Our selection panel was a diverse selection panel. We actually chose team members from outside of the program influence, and we also we have a particular role at Torrens University called our Senior Learning Facilitator First Nations curriculum. And we have a range of other various diverse roles that we decided to bring into the selection process to ensure we looked at these quite independently and authentically selected students based on merit for application. So that's a bit about kind of how and what we were aiming at, and then how we achieved elements of those. I'll hand back to you, Anne, now to take us through the logistics of the program proper.
Thanks, Ash. So I'm going to talk about the logistics and the itinerary, and having formed relationships with lots of different Nepali organisations over many years, I really did know where to visit and what to expect. So rather than me tell you about it, I've got some pictures that show you the activities and some of the places that we visited. So arriving in Kathmandu to the wonderful smells and sights and sounds of this amazing city, we started off by visiting the important cultural sites and learned about daily Nepali life by visiting the hustle and bustle of the main marketplace and the busy streets. We experienced the local yoga tradition and had expert speakers come and talk to us each day about health and equity and the public health challenges that they face. We visited a wide variety of different health facilities, including naturopathy, Ayurveda, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and all of these are relevant to the students' area of study. And in many cases, the students were able to experience the treatments for themselves. We also visited an incredible community-built hospital and world-renowned rehabilitation centre for disabled children, where we interacted with the kids and their families, and we distributed toys and books and activities that we collected before we left Australia. There was a lot of them. We also had some once-in-a-lifetime experiences and opportunities, like watching the sunrise over the Himalayas. But one of the highlights for our students was visiting this residential nursing college in Pokhara, where the students all interacted in small groups and learned about each other's lives. And many of our students reflected after the trip that this was the major highlight for them. So as part of the assessment strategy for this subject, the students were required to submit this video reflection about the whole trip, but also a written reflection about a single photo that influenced them during the trip. And rather than me tell you about the outcomes, here are some of the students' voices from those reflections.
Prior to leaving for Nepal, I was going through a really difficult time mentally and emotionally. I actually wrote a journal entry on the 1st of December that sums up exactly how I was feeling. So I feel like such a failure. I feel completely exhausted, burnt to the core, and have had multiple breakdowns. I feel like I'm not a good friend. My work ethic has been horrible. I've slacked off at uni, and I haven't been going to the gym or walking my dog. The hardest thing is I know how great my life is. I'm going on a once-in-a-lifetime trip in 3 days, and I know how privileged I am. So on the last day, this was my journal entry. Our last reflection was really magical. We spent 2.5 hours discussing our trip highlights and expressing gratitude for everyone's support and the opportunity to have this experience. This trip has altered how I perceive both myself and the world. I feel so much more open to new opportunities and challenges, and I'm excited to push more boundaries in my life. I feel blessed to be surrounded by such like-minded people and to have made such deep connections. I feel so content in my life, and I'm so proud of myself. So comparing this journal entry to what I wrote prior to debarking for Nepal, I think it just shows how transformational this experience was for me mentally. And I will forever be changed because of it. And for that, I am so, so grateful.
My time in Nepal gave me the space to think about who I am as a person and who I want to be as a practitioner. Learning from powerful women in business such as Lakshmi and connecting with countless health professionals, academics, and fellow students has inspired me both professionally and personally.
The entire experience in Nepal has helped shape me as a person, as well as contributed to my professional identity as a naturopath, future business owner, and social enterprise entrepreneur. I truly believe that I've made industry connections for life, which I think is so powerful and makes me feel so much more supported as I make the transition to clinical practice this year.
It has been such an honour to be a part of the Nepal Work Integrated Learning Program. It has changed me as a human for the better, and I have grown in ways that I never imagined possible. My professional identity has shifted from the very narrow path of a sole clinical practitioner to something much broader and wholesome, a co-founder of a social enterprise. The experience that I gained and friendships formed will always be with me, and I'm sure will continue to shape me for years to come. The ability to learn how to set up, build, and run a social enterprise, although still a developing skill, is something amazing.
And we have dozens and dozens of quotes like that about the transformation the students felt and how profound the trip was. And we are performing research on the outcomes for this for the students. And Ash will talk more about the research now.
Thanks, Anne. So a research team of Dr. Amber Moore, Professor Craig McLaughlin, and Digby and myself have progressed into post-evaluations of these programs. The project design aims and hypothesis, the study was employed a mixed methods design using pre and post surveys and semi-structured interviews to investigate the effects of interprofessional wheel trip on students' self-perceived cultural competence and interprofessional collaboration skills to explore their experiences and perspectives on their personal, cultural, and professional development. The aims of the research are to evaluate the change in cultural competence and interprofessional collaboration skills and explore the experiences and perspectives of multidisciplinary health science students participating in a work integrated learning trip to Nepal. So the primary hypothesis put forward in our ethics approved projects that are currently underway are a will learning trip to Nepal increases health science students' cultural competence as measured by cultural competence measurement scale for healthcare workers at EMCC 14. A will trip to Nepal increases health science students' interprofessional collaboration competency as measured by the IPEC Competency Self-Assessment version 3 scale. Currently, we've had the phase 1 already occur, which was the pre and post test surveys. They were administered in December 2022 pre-trip and January 2023 post-trip. Participation rates were surprisingly, I suppose you can hear from the profoundness of the trip, there was clearly motivations to be involved, but very high, 21 out of 26 students participated in the surveys. Phase 2, post-trip semi-structured interviews have been conducted online from January 2023, and we had 12 students interviewed so far, with more interviews still to be completed. So the interview questions, again, based on that EMCC 14 and IPEC survey questions, and also use qualitative questions from another will study, schedule of open-ended questions. So they were, what are the main things you learned from this placement? What aspects of this placement were particularly beneficial to your learning experience? What were the main challenges of your placement experience? In what ways has this placement contributed to your development as a professional? And please suggest ways your placement experience could be improved. Early themes emerging out of the interview data are around student reflections on increasing cultural awareness and sensitivity, both in Nepal and back in Australia, and the perceived life and career changing benefits of learning in another cultural setting with a group of personal and professional networks. The survey and interview data is yet to be fully analysed, so these will be shared via publications at a later date. If you're interested, just keep in touch, and we'll be happy to share those results once they get to that point. Thanks, Anne. And I might hand over to Dominica now to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you very much. I would just quickly provide you a bit of a background information about Torrens, which is one of the fastest growing universities. We offer a global academic experience that is fully connected to the industry. Only in 2022, we had over 20,000 industry placements, opportunities, job opportunities for students, internships, hackathons, placements, scholarships, casual jobs, you name it. But not only working with the industry outside of the classroom, we also have heavily embedded industry presence within our curriculum. And as Ashley was saying, the real world experiential learning occurs in the class through various interactions with industry, through live briefs, client class visits, and similar. We are one of very few universities in the world who are B Corp certified, and in 2020 we've opened Social Enterprise Hub, which enable us to engage with the social enterprises and engage them in the classroom and outside of the classroom extracurricular activities. On top of it, we also have this amazing small team head by Vanessa Goldamas, who is looking after study abroad and who post-COVID have got probably same struggles as everyone else. How can we re-engage the international onshore and offshore studies for our students? And the example that Ashley, who is the program director of health sciences, and Annie, who is the senior learning facilitator and the subject coordinator, were a fantastic example of one of actually many to come initiatives where we'll try to engage the NCP funding, other fundings, to take our students through this experiential but very much meaningful learning journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominica, Ashley, and Anne. That was a very interesting presentation. I've got some questions in the chat. So Kim was wondering if you could share a bit more about the risk assessments that were undertaken with the overseas partners before departure.
And do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I'll field that one. So we did a comprehensive risk assessment, which is required by DFAT before you undertake the program. And having a vast amount of experience in country doing exactly these activities, I was able to do that fairly easily. I understood the risks. I'd been to all of the places. And so whilst it was comprehensive, I found it quite easy for this location.
Thanks, Anne. Leanne has also asked about the cross-cultural competencies experience pre and post the experience for educators.
That's a really interesting question. So we, Anne and I obviously were the two facilitators on the ground over there. Anne is in a little bit of a different position to me in that I suppose in many ways she'd been on to these locations multiple times. For me, the Nepal experience was new. And although we haven't done an evaluation specifically on our experiences, what I can anecdotally say is that it was profound. It was profound to see the students through this process in particular. I think, you know, having traveled before, it wasn't so much for me the same sort of experience the students were having with the locations, but the intensity of the experience for the students, being able to be present with them in the moment and support them through a significantly emotionally challenging experience was quite a profound opportunity for academic development, that's for sure. You know, for example, our mechanisms like debriefing circles that we were running with students at the end of each day became absolutely paramount for viability of the program, for students being adequately supported through an experience of this nature. I mean, we're talking about cultural shock for students, but in addition, you know, we're taking them into centres where the experiences are confronting as well. You know, a disability hospital in a developing country is obviously going to position them in a space where many of them had never seen. Being able to recognise what their own filter is and potentially examine, you know, their own biases and privilege and considerations like that it's quite a profound thing to have to do rapidly on the ground alongside the challenge of just leaving. And some of these students actually had never left Australia before. It was their first trip overseas, and some of them had never travelled alone before. So when you consider the context that they were coming in with, the role of the facilitator in that is quite enormous. And I think for me, the experience was profound in, I suppose, reminding myself why we do what we do, which is to be really there and present for students to guide that development and create better humans, you know, for the future.
That's what we're all here to do, supposedly, Ash. So thank you for sharing that. Bronwyn would like to know more about why the partners engaged and was it transformational for them?
And you might be best to answer this one again. I think between you and a couple of other staff members, most of our contacts were sort of harnessed that way. So do you want to talk through?
Why did they want to engage? They're very generous with their engagement regardless. And I think that it's, I'm not quite sure how to put it, but you know, it's almost like networking for them. And the more they network, the more people know about them, and you know, it creates ongoing benefits for them in many ways. And that may be for volunteers, it may be for income, or it may be in other ways. We were going to include them in research because we are very keen to find out what benefits we leave them with, but we were unable to get, we didn't have the time to put it through the ethics committee before we left, and so we're planning to put it through our ethics committee this year, and that will be part of our future program, is to actually measure the benefits.
And if I can add to that, I think it's important to recognize that those partners, they're not coming only for their transactional quick gain for themselves and for us, for students. We try to look at whoever we engage with as meaningful long-term partners. And currently, for example, we're having a conversation between Annie, who represents the health faculty, and business faculty where I work, on a continuation of the service and taking students through the same learning journey. So while there will be some certain health sciences elements that could be taught and discussed by the health sciences students, business students can help them from the business perspective, maybe from some marketing or strategy perspective, where we can kind of contribute. And therefore, holistically, we can enable those social service, social presence and gain better audience and better business performance. So we're trying not to look at any relationship as a transactional one-off because we need it for one term for the assessment piece. We're looking at them as a client and a long-term relationship, which actually pays off. Sorry, Ash, you wanted to add some.
No, I think you said it quite well, Dominica. I'll leave it there.
I have a quick question. You mentioned earlier in the program that you had to identify the course that this experience could sit against. How was that when you approached the academics saying, hey, we want to do this experience and embed it in your course? How was it received? And how did you work with them to make it happen?
So I think we're at a significant advantage. I suppose I'm the department leader, and Anne is the subject coordinator for that particular subject that we selected in the end. So that didn't actually bias the decision. It's actually, I think it speaks to the skill set that Anne brought into the role to begin with. And again, that just meant it was a natural correlation regardless. But we did actually look across the whole course because Anne didn't propose her own subject to begin with. It was actually through continual engagement that we discussed it. And I suppose that inertia of seeing her subject the way it already was existed. And we had to work through that collectively to see, well, let's take away the barriers of what is and see what could be with this subject. And is there a delivery model that it could exist that instead positions this experience right in the middle of the program? I suppose, Anne, you can probably reflect on from your end how that played out as well. But from my end, I think once we evaluated that it was the best subject in our faculty to go ahead with, it was definitely a case of respectful, appropriately, gentle conversation around why we think that it could work well in that space and work through those barriers.
Thank you. Marcella has a quick question. Did you want to turn your mic on, Marcella, and just ask your question?
Oh, yes, thank you. Congrats for this beautiful work and trip. I was wondering, have you thought to include some students from the same local that you are just traveling, for example, as we have a lot of overseas students and also from Nepal? Did you have this opportunity or something just to include them? I think bring more different eyes in this experience. It's just this. Thank you.
Yeah, so we would really like to do that. One of the criteria for the new Colombo Plan grants is that it's available to Australian citizens, and it's specifically not available to citizens of the country that you visit. And which doesn't mean that we can't take international students, but it means that they're not eligible for the grant, so they would need to be self-funded. And we did originally offer that. We offered positions, self-funded positions for students who were not Australian citizens, but really, students who saw that, there was a grant available, they felt that they didn't really want to pay for it, or they couldn't pay for it, more to the point. And so we are trying to overcome that barrier. I think that is a barrier. And somehow we'll overcome it in the future.
Nicole from UQ, you've got a question. Nicole Scavalis.
Yeah, I had a question. We have run similar types of courses here at UQ where we have like NCP funding. It's a tour overseas. So similar, but it's in business faculty. And while the students have that have attended and gone on this course have loved it, we've actually always found that getting enough students interest in the course has always been a problem. And I just wondered how you went about marketing it to students, because I'm assuming this is obviously an elective course.
No, it's a core unit.
Ah, right.
So the subject is a core unit for most of the subjects, most of the courses, except for a couple of the newer ones. It's an elective, but we didn't have any trouble getting interest. We're fighting them back from the door.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the fact that it was a core unit, to the point, is actually, it meant we were actually offering an alternative delivery model. It's like offering online, on campus, and international work integrated learning delivery model. Which one actually meets the criteria of learning you're looking to have as an outcome. And I think initially our response rate was very high. We had a significant number of students apply, and that meant that a significant number weren't actually able to attend. I think we ended up only being able to offer a place to around 50% of applicants in the end. And to be honest with you, the main inertia we experienced was there wasn't any proof of concept yet at Torrens for these students. They didn't have much to look at to see what that experience would be, and it was a bit of a leap of faith in this first iteration of the program. What we were able to showcase to them was some of the work that Anne had done in the past in running external non-Torrens related programs that would have a similar agenda, and that was part of our marketing that we ended up sending to students. We said, this is not the program, but the intent is that we'll be running a program that allowed for similar experiences for our students. We also do have internal marketing teams as well for our existing students. So we engaged with those guys to put together some communication strategy for us, which then meant that those students received a campaign of information, application process, reminders on application closing periods. And then at the end of the process, we've actually done an internal communication back to our Torrens students, again, sharing the outcomes so that propagation of the program continues. And I think actually for this next round, we're expecting a very high response rate, because clearly a lot of students now feel like they've missed out. It's a core program that they've still got ahead of them, so they might recalibrate what order of study they've got remaining to hold off on that program such that they can make the next round.
Yeah, great, thank you. Faith, I can also just see another question in the chat there. Someone's asking that they feel that this looks like an international study tour experience rather than a work integrated learning placement or work integrated learning course. I'm not sure, Anne, if you're able to respond to that, or Ashley.
I was going to say, I'm not. Yeah, so I suppose the underlying question there is it a work integrated learning placement? So yes, I think what we've addressed is that we had students going into aligned facilities. They weren't just traveling through as transient contributors. They actually had hands-on experiences within those facilities, engaging with the services, but also being participants at times within those facilities. So in short, it equivalated to a work integrated learning experience, I think.
Thank you, Ashley. And just one quick last question. Bronwyn, you had a follow-up question to Marcella's question. Did you want to turn your mic on and ask that question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this. I mean, congratulations. What an amazing program. I just wanted to know about how you could maybe bring in the Nepalese students and whether you considered including them as part of the pre-departure preparation that you do.
We did. We found that it ended up being quite a short period of time to get everything organised, given that it was the first one. It was the first one after COVID, all that kind of thing. And so there was a plan to get the nursing students that we spent the day with and connecting them via Zoom beforehand. But we just kind of ran out of time. So the plan we're going again in January. When we go in January, we will actually have time to connect the students together so that they'll have some interaction before they get there, kind of like the old pen pals used to be. And then they'll get to meet each other and continue the relationship after that. Yeah.
I want to say congratulations. It sounds like
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking Dominica and Ashley for sharing this fantastic experience with us. So I'm just going to do a round of applause. Thank you so much. Quickly, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Mr. Liam Cosgrave is the director of the new Columbo Plan Secretariat. Liam has a wealth of educational experience. He's worked with the Department of Education. He's also worked at Australian National University, and he's now with the new Colombo Plan Secretariat. Liam's going to speak briefly about some of the reforms that they have coming up for 2024, and he's also going to answer some of your questions. So Liam, are you there? Can I hand over to you quickly?
Yes, can you hear me okay? My computer's saying it doesn't recognize my camera, but I'll give that another go. There we go.
Yep, there you are.
Okay,
We can see
yeah,
you.
okay. Well, it's good to see everyone. And I'll just preface this by saying that nothing that I'm about to say will be anywhere near as interesting as the stories of the students that we heard earlier on. That was really fantastic to hear, and it's just as Faith was saying, my background is very much in the education space and in the university space, and yeah, it just gives me, I hope it's the same with everyone, but just more when you turn up to work and you know that when you do your job well, that this is the end result of it. It's just so satisfying. So thanks so much for that presentation just now. I know we don't have too much time, and I'm not sure how across the structure and so on of the NCP everyone is. So just very briefly, so there's the scholarships program, which is offered to individual students for up to 19 months in country, and then there's the mobility project, which is offered to universities to run their projects, as we've just heard, in country for their students for courses that are integral to the students, as someone was saying before, Australian citizens for Australian degrees. That is the selection criteria there. I won't go into too much more detail there. If people have got questions, please let me know. I will just briefly mention that the ambassador to Nepal had my job a few years ago. So she is also, we've got a great ally in Nepal, and yeah, so it's really interesting she's always very, very interested in what's going on, and that just reminds me again of the importance of making sure that, I know we go on about making sure that student details are correct in our systems and so on. And just before I go into the renewal forms, just making sure that those things are up to date, because people like the ambassador do turn in. I don't know, this isn't about this project whatsoever, but it's just more generally about sometimes we have problems with people not having up-to-date details of who's in country, and if something happens, the ambassador says, okay, so who's in here now? And yeah, so we really appreciate when that happens. About the reform, so at the moment we're looking at, so we're getting ready for the 2024 round, so publishing the guidelines for the 2024 round of the scholarship and mobility programs. We had hoped to have the guidelines published by this point, and we are well advanced in that regard. perhaps a reason why they're not quite published yet is there are some fairly significant reforms to the program, which hopefully they gel well with what people's planning is, and the objectives of the program to form deeper connections, institutional connections and people connections in the region. So one of the reforms is that we're intending to remove the upper age limit on participants for the NCP. Oh, I see a smile. That's gone down well with someone. Yeah, so that is something that we've heard a lot from the region, the sector, and that's something that we are, shall we say, investigating very closely, and hoping to be able to do that. We're also looking at cost of living impacts and what the best settings for the amount of stipend that scholars get, for example, but also our advice around the appropriate use of mobility grant funding. So the guidelines change from year to year, and we have given different advice about how, what an appropriate level of funding is. And so we're looking at that again, and that's reflecting cost of living increases and cost of travel and so on. And also there's also a diversity aspect to that. We've looking at some wording around if it is the case, for example, for regional and remote students who, if there's a grant funding amount and it costs them X amount of money to get to a capital city to take their flight, is that a reasonable amount? How does that affect the grant funding? So that's the sort of thinking that's very much been on our minds, and so hopefully. Sorry, Nick?
Sorry, Liam. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm struggling to hear you.
Oh, really? Can other people hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
No,
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right, great. So yeah, so we're just looking at the structure of the grants and how it can best, because part of the program goals is to represent and support the diversity of modern Australia, what Australia is. And so in terms of it's not a one size fits all, the world's not one size fits all, and so we're trying to reflect that a little bit more in the wording around the grant. So hopefully that makes sense. Do get in touch if something needs. We are also preparing beside the guidelines, what we call the advice to applicants, which we put out every year, which tries to explain what we're trying to say in the guidelines. So another thing that we're looking at, which is more broad thinking, is in terms of, so it is, the NCP is an undergraduates program. Our legislative authority, the reason why we have authority to suspend public funding is clearly and specifically for Australian students who are undergraduate for in-country experiences. And so while we're looking at possibilities for the future of other types of students who could be supported, that's a little bit down the track, but it is something that we're bearing in mind. Okay, and yeah, so they're the main reforms that we're looking at for 2024. And I would just say we have had a few questions about what the priorities are for different projects and so on. And I think that's a real strength of the program, is that we don't state them quite deliberately, because that gives, I think, more opportunity for innovation in. We do say it's to promote Australia's outreach and engagement with the Indo-Pacific and support government priorities. But the government priorities, the government's living in a democracy, governments change. And so we don't go to any more detail than that. But the fact that there are media releases about government priorities and so on, for example, around First Nations diplomacy is a real priority for the government. Around climate change and areas like that. So we don't have to, if we stipulate things like this in the guidelines, then the guidelines stay, but whereas saying that we support government priorities and then people can tie in with, and we get some great applications that quite clearly are very aware of how that their projects or how an individual scholarship will achieve the program's objectives of tying in with those government priorities in the Indo-Pacific. I know we've only got 10 minutes left. I could talk all day, but has anyone got any questions at this point?
I've got a quick question. If someone else, I'll dive in quickly. I'm interested when you said that you're considering expanding beyond just undergraduate students. As someone who didn't have these opportunities when I went to university, that I'm extremely jealous of. I guess that's, you're thinking like postgrad certificates and diplomas, masters. Are you think with the push to increase internships and PhD programs, is that something, would you extend that far, do you think?
Yeah, so we're open to the possibilities, and even like we've had a lot of feedback about there's some fantastic vet courses that are, we could run some really great mobility projects, and we are open to those possibilities and what it might mean for the program, but we do not have, so when we update the guidelines every year, we have to ensure that they are within our legislative authority, that we are spending public money in the way that it has been given to the department to spend. And at the moment, so that's why that is not going to be something which changes in this round. It just clearly isn't. What happens in the future, we'll see. But it's something that's on our mind, and I know that there's been a lot of stakeholder engagement about that, but we don't have, that is not an imminent change.
Thank you. I have a question. If that's it. The guidelines are coming out soon. When will the submissions be due by? Is that changing? Not significantly. We haven't. So the current version of the guidelines has got open date XXXXX, close date at XXXX. But if we were to be publishing the guidelines tomorrow, then we could fill in those dates from what makes sense going forward. In terms of the general structure, so something that we have told to people who have asked about, okay, so we're waiting for the guidelines, we've got these processes at the university where we try to plan ahead. Looking at the previous year's guidelines, we don't have any impetus to change them, except for the fact that because of the reforms that we're looking at, that could change. Another reform I should have mentioned, sorry, we're also looking at the length of mobility projects and what options there might be for supporting longer mobility projects. That's another thing that we're looking at as well. So there's a few that in some ways, they're really quite technical changes in terms of it's changing a few words in the guidelines, but just making sure that we're on the right track and that everyone's happy with them is taking a little bit of time. So in terms of timeframes for getting them out, I wish they were out already, but it's very much on our well, not just on our minds, but in our inboxes to be doing this every day. Sorry, my question was more around the closing date. Will we have plenty of time with the guidelines? Yeah. So the opening period is looking to be around the same. So I could be wrong here, but it has been in the region of close to 2 months that the applications have been open for, and we certainly. The other thing is, so in terms of our timelines, one timeline is so mobility projects and scholarships can start on the 1st of January of the year, so of 2024. So people have to know before then that they've got funding. And so how much we could compress the rest, but people having time to apply obviously is critical. We are looking at the timeframes for can we get more people involved in the assessment process, so we have fewer weeks of assessment.
Shed Sheet has a question. Did you want to turn your microphone on and ask? You've got 2 questions there, one about the portal and about extensions. Do you want to turn your microphone on?
I can talk to both the portal and the. Oh, sorry, what was the second part of that?
Hello. So there's two things.
Hmm?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. The internship and portal is no longer in use.
Yeah.
Is there a new portal?
Yeah. So we are undergoing a quite massive IT change at the moment. The branch that I work in, the branch that the new Colombo Plan is in, is actually in the same branch, for example, as the Australia Awards scholarships, which are scholarships for coming into Australia. And just some background, the IT so it used to be the case that the new Colombo Plan was the Department of Education and DFAT both ran the new Colombo Plan, and now it's with DFAT. The old IT systems with Department of Education, the Australia Awards has got another IT system. We're trying to make one IT system. Part of that is the internship portal and making it a place that makes sense. So we're working on a larger IT upgrades, and the internship portal is very much part of that. In terms of information about current internship possibilities, that's something that we are really interested, and we send out updates for scholars and for ILOs, people at the universities who engage with our program, and we try to keep the information that we have about internships as up to date as possible. But I know it is the fact that the internship portal isn't there anymore is
because it's making life very hard. I've got students on semester exchange and internships, and
yeah, I understand.
And it would have been nice to know this was not going to be available
right
after COVID, but next,
yeah,
we could live with it.
Yeah, apologies.
In the future, in terms of internships, what's happening?
Yeah,
because you're sending the message that maybe this is not so important after.
Yeah, it's a matter of resourcing. Yeah, we
and
understand.
the other issue is that some of our NCP exchange and internship partners have been a bit conservative in opening up after COVID-19 too. So we've had some NCP funding extensions, but even if you get 10 students, they may only take 1 or 2 because that's all their risk aversion or risk matrix. So can we request for further extensions, because this doesn't seem to be coming through also?
Yeah, so the extension policy, I'm not sure if you are in the ILO group, but the extension policy has been up to altogether. There are some projects now that'll be 5 years old that the extension and still within the extension date.
Because we lost 3 years. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
But I'm saying that's at our end, but some of our NCP partners on the other end.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's the sort of thing that if it's the case that you need, so from a 2018 or 2019 project, if it's the case that it can't go ahead and there's opportunity to apply for a new project in the 2024 round, maybe that's the way to go about that.
No, I'd rather have an extension than a new project. It just takes too much effort.
I understand.
I think from a bureaucracy point, granting extension would be probably easier than.
Well, it's very unusual to have more than a 3-year extension on a project. Of course, COVID we did put the extensions on hold, but typically it used to be the case before COVID that it was very rare. It was rare to offer any extension at all. So if you apply for funding in a funding period, the assumption was that you would spend the funding in that funding period. I can't see the extension period being extended further.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'll stop the questions there. I'd like to thank Liam for taking the time out and coming and answering some difficult questions and letting us know about the upcoming reforms. Really excited about some of the changes that are coming through. And I'd like everyone to join me to say thank you, Liam, for coming. That's my shaking hands. The next ACEN event will be in May, and that will be reviewing the GOS
survey outcomes in relation to work integrated learning. So check out your emails for that. And Liam, when the reforms are out, we're very happy to send that information out to our members.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to send that on, that would
sounds
be great.
great. Thanks so much, Faith. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Appreciate the time.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Anne, Dominica, Nikki, and Ashley. That was a good session. Hopefully it went well.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers, thank
No,
you.
it was
Yeah,
good. And it's
yeah.
nice to have, we could probably stop recording, Nikki. I'm not sure if Nikki's still there.